The morning air in Portland's Pearl District carried the scent of fresh rain and roasted coffee, a familiar comfort. As I arranged a tray of lemon cupcakes in the display case of my bakery Sweet Bloom. The shop buzzed with the usual Monday crowd, locals grabbing their morning pastries, the jingle of the door a steady rhythm. I was tying a ribbon around a box of cupcakes for Mrs. Carter, a regular who always ordered extra for her book club, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen, expecting a reminder about Avery's school pickup. Instead, it was a text from my husband Ethan. "I'm done with you. Sadie and I are moving to LA. I've cleaned out our joint account. Good luck, sweetheart." My heart dropped like a stone in a well, but my smile stayed as steady as the Portland drizzle outside. I handed Mrs. Carter her box, my hands not even trembling. "Enjoy your book club," I said, my voice smooth, unruffled. She smiled, oblivious to the bomb that had just gone off in my life. Only a slight tightening around my eyes betrayed the fact that my husband of 14 years had just torched our marriage with a single text. I waited until Mrs. Carter left the door, jingling shut behind her, before I picked up my phone again. I read the message once more, Ethan's words sinking in like a bitter aftertaste. Cleaned out our joint account. Moving to LA with Sadie Harper, his 22-year-old sales assistant. The one who'd giggled too loudly at his jokes during last year's company picnic. I could picture her now twirling her hair, probably thinking she'd won some grand prize. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I reached under the counter, pulled out a crisp white envelope I'd prepared weeks ago, and set it on the counter. "If Ethan stops by, give him this," I told my assistant Jenna, my voice as calm as if I were asking her to refill the coffee urn. Jenna nodded her brow, furrowing slightly, but she didn't ask questions. She'd seen me handle rush hour chaos without breaking a sweat. Apparently, I could handle a marriage implosion with the same grace. I stepped into the back kitchen, the smell of yeast and sugar wrapping around me like a hug, and poured myself a cup of coffee, the mug warm in my hands. Outside, the Portland rain pattered against the window, a soft gray curtain over the city. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of relief. Ethan thought he'd blindsided me, that I'd be a sobbing mess, begging him to stay. He had no idea I'd been preparing for this moment, that I'd seen this storm coming from miles away. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness matching my mood, and let myself smile a small private smile. That envelope wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the first step in a plan I'd been baking for months, a plan that would turn Ethan's betrayal into my victory. I'm Lillian Monroe Lilly, to my friends 39 years old, and I'd just received the most callous goodbye of my life. But while Ethan was probably toasting his grand escape, with Sadie imagining me crumbling, I was already 3 steps ahead. I've always been good with numbers. You see, a side gig as a freelance accountant had taught me how to spot discrepancies, how to protect what's mine. And Ethan, he'd left a trail of crumbs I couldn't ignore. I've always been good with numbers. You see, a side gig as a freelance accountant had taught me how to spot discrepancies, how to protect what's mine. And Ethan, he'd left a trail of crumbs I couldn't ignore. While he chased his fleeting dreams of promotions and corner offices, 3 failed sales campaigns, a midlife crisis that sent him to networking retreats in Bend. I kept our family from sinking. I balanced our books when he splurged our savings on a flashy sports car, a purchase that tanked our credit score in a year. I worked late nights auditing small businesses, making sure Avery's school fees were paid, while Ethan rebranded himself with a wardrobe of skinny jeans and graphic tees. A rebrand that lasted about as long as a Portland summer brief, fleeting gone before you could blink. My own dream expanding Sweet Bloom into a chain or starting an accounting firm for women entrepreneurs always waited in the wings. After Avery settled in school, I'd tell myself wiping flour off my hands at 5 a.m., the Portland skyline a soft gray through the bakery window, after Ethan lands that big promotion. But with Ethan, promotions were as elusive as sunshine in January. 5 months ago, I noticed irregularities in our joint account. Small charges, nothing huge, but they didn't add up. A round-trip ticket to LA, $500. A weekend stay at the Ace Hotel, $800. A jewelry store purchase, $200 for a necklace I'd never seen. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a bank glitch maybe, but I'm not the kind of woman who lets numbers lie. I've spent years catching errors in balance sheets. I wasn't about to ignore this, so I dug deeper, quietly, methodically, like I was auditing a client's books. I logged into our account late at night, the bakery kitchen, silent except for the hum of the fridge. The Portland rain, a steady patter outside. I traced the charges, cross-checked them with our credit card statements, my fingers steady on the laptop keys. What I found was a betrayal as cold as the Willamette River in winter. Ethan had been siphoning money into a secret account for over a year. He'd taken Sadie to rooftop dinners in the Pearl District, bought her that necklace, even put a deposit on a condo in LA, $4,000 to $1,000 non-refunded. All while telling me we needed to watch our spending for Avery's future. We can't afford that new oven for the bakery right now. Lily, he'd said last month, his voice tight as we sat at our kitchen table in Laurelhurst. I'd nodded, trusting him while he was wiring money to his mistress. Then I found the receipt. It slipped out of Ethan's jacket pocket one evening as I was hanging it up after he'd stumbled home late claiming a client dinner. A receipt for 2 at a swanky restaurant in downtown Portland, dated the same night he'd said he was working late. The math didn't add up, neither did his story. That same evening, I opened a separate account at a different bank, moving my personal savings from Sweet Bloom's profits into it. A week later, when Ethan suggested combining our accounts to streamline things, I agreed with a smile, all while transferring the bulk of our funds to my new account. The joint account, he'd just emptied it, held just enough to keep him from getting suspicious, about 2 months' worth of regular deposits. The rest was safe, along with detailed records of every shady transaction he'd made over the past year. I'd printed them out, organized them in a binder, each page a testament to his deceit. I met Sadie at last year's company picnic, a bright-eyed 22-year-old, with a laugh that grated on my nerves. She'd hovered around Ethan, touching his arm, giggling at his terrible dad jokes, her eyes sparkling like she'd discovered gold. I'd watched her, my stomach twisting, but I'd brushed it off. Ethan had laughed it off too. "She's just friendly, Lily," he'd said, popping a strawberry into his mouth, the sun glinting off his new aviators. Friendly. Right. I should have known then, but I didn't want to believe it. Not until the evidence was undeniable. I found more proof on his phone one night when he'd left it on the counter passcode, unchanged despite his recent security concerns. A text from Sadie. "Can't wait for LA. Babe, we're finally free." My chest tightened, a cold weight settling in. I scrolled through their messages, my hands steady, my heart racing. Plans for their new life together. His promise to handle things after Avery's summer camp ended. His decision to announce our split right after her school year, knowing I'd be too busy with the bakery to react. "She'll be too tired to fight," he'd written. Sadie replied, "Perfect. We'll be sipping cocktails in LA by then." I stood there, the rain tapping against the kitchen window, the smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven, feeling like my world had tilted off its axis. 14 years late-night baking sessions cheering at Avery's soccer games, holding Ethan through his failures, it was all a sham. But I didn't break. I took screenshots, emailed them to myself, then locked his phone and set it back down exactly as I'd found it. Ethan came downstairs a few minutes later, whistling clueless. "Smells amazing in here," he said, grabbing a glass of water. I forced a smile. "Thanks." What Ethan didn't know, what he never understood, was that I'm a master at keeping the books balanced both in business and in life. I tracked every transaction, every late-night client meeting, every lie. I hired a private investigator, a discreet woman named Tara, who specialized in domestic cases. She met me at a cafe near the bakery, the scent of espresso and rain in the air, and handed me a file thicker than a recipe book. Photos of Ethan and Sadie at a hotel in LA, holding hands in Venice Beach. Receipts from a weekend in San Francisco where they'd stayed at a boutique inn. A lease agreement for an apartment in LA, signed in both their names. Tara's voice was gentle, her eyes kind. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Monroe. I know this isn't easy." I nodded, tucking the file into my bag, my hands steady. "Thank you," I said. I wasn't falling apart. I was building a fortress. I revisited the prenuptial agreement we'd signed 14 years ago, back when Ethan insisted on protecting his future earnings. He'd been so paranoid then, a young salesman with big dreams, worried I'd take half if things went south. I'd signed it without hesitation. I loved him, believed in us. Now that document would be his downfall. Hidden in the fine print was an infidelity clause, one that imposed steep financial penalties if either of us cheated. I read it late at night, the bakery quiet the rain, a steady hum outside Ethan, asleep upstairs, unaware of the reckoning I was planning. The clause was airtight. I met with Henry Caldwell, my attorney, the next morning at his office in downtown Portland, the Willamette River glinting through the window. "It's solid," Henry said, sipping his coffee, a grin on his face. "With the evidence, you've got those transactions, the messages, the photos. He'll lose the house, the joint assets, everything." I nodded, stirring my latte, a quiet resolve settling over me. "Good," I said. "Let's move forward." I spent the next few months preparing, working in the shadows while Ethan planned his dramatic escape. I documented everything, every transfer, every text, every lie. I met with Henry again to file the divorce papers, timing it with precision. I knew Ethan would wait until after Avery's school year to make his announcement. He'd want to avoid upsetting her, or so he'd tell himself. What he didn't know was that I'd filed the papers that very morning before his text at the bakery. They were safely stored in court records, not yet accessible to him, but ready to strike when the time was right. I was always 3 steps ahead. Ethan thought he'd caught me off guard with his message, but I'd been ready for this betrayal longer than he could imagine. I drove to our home in Laurelhurst, a cozy bungalow we'd bought 10 years ago, back when we were a team, or so I'd thought. The house Ethan had already promised to Sadie, according to those phone messages he didn't know I'd seen. I parked in the driveway, the familiar scent of wet grass and cedar, greeting me as I stepped out the rain, a gentle mist. Inside, everything looked the same. The hardwood floors we'd refinished after Avery's first birthday party, when she'd spilled juice everywhere. The gallery wall of her milestones, her first finger painting, her kindergarten graduation, her soccer trophy from last year. The kitchen counter where Ethan and I used to bake cookies with her, laughing as flour dusted our noses, dreaming of her future. But everything had changed. The house felt hollow, a shell of what it once was. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, the faint creak of the stairs, a familiar sound. I opened the closet, my fingers brushing against the aprons I'd worn to countless bakery events, always the supportive wife. Behind them, tucked in the corner, were his suitcases, packed, ready for his departure tomorrow, right after his big reveal. I stared at them, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. He'd always been obsessive about his packing, rolling his shirts just so tucking his shoes into dust bags. But when it came to what truly mattered, he was careless, blind. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Texts from friends at the bakery from Nora, Ethan's sister, who'd always been more my friend than his. I pulled it out, my chest tightening at a message from Avery's school. Reminder, parent-teacher conference tomorrow. I typed back a quick confirmation, my fingers steady despite the ache in my heart. I'd kept Avery in the dark for months, not wanting to taint her school year. She'd worked so hard balancing soccer practice with her math tutoring, all while Ethan was siphoning money to Sadie. Avery would be upset I hadn't told her, but I knew she'd understand eventually. She had my knack for logic, my eye for detail, but she also had her father's charm, a combination that made her shine. I couldn't let Ethan's betrayal dim that light. Not yet. I sat on the edge of our bed, the quilt my mother had made for our wedding day, soft under my hands, its stitches a map of a life I thought I knew. I thought about our early days, Ethan surprising me with coffee runs to Stumptown, the two of us hiking in Forest Park, laughing as we slipped on muddy trails. We'd been through so much, 3 failed sales campaigns that drained our savings. Avery's tough toddler years when she'd wake up crying from earaches, and Ethan would sing her to sleep, his voice soft and low. A miscarriage before Avery, a loss that had broken us both. But we'd held each other through the grief. When had he changed? Or had he always been this man, selfish, deceitful, and I'd been too busy baking to see it? I shook my head, pushing the memories away. They didn't matter now. What mattered was the plan I'd set in motion. That envelope I'd left at the bakery wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a spark, a flare, a way out of the storm. I stood, adjusted my apron, and headed downstairs, ready for the fight I knew was coming. 4 hours later, just as I was locking up Sweet Bloom for the day, the sound of Ethan's car screeched into the driveway of our Laurelhurst home tires, skidding on the rain-slicked pavement. The front door burst open, a gust of damp Portland air, rushing in, carrying the scent of wet cedar. "Lily," he shouted, his voice, a mix of fury and panic, echoing through the house. "Where the hell are you?" I was in the kitchen setting out a plate of cookies for Avery's after-school snack. My laptop open on the counter, a spreadsheet of Ethan's transactions glowing on the screen. I closed it with a soft click as he stormed in his face, flushed the white envelope I'd left at the bakery crumpled in his hand. "What is this supposed to mean?" he demanded, slamming the papers onto the counter, his voice shaking with rage. "You filed for divorce today, on Avery's last day of school." I looked up at him, my expression calm, my voice steady. "I thought it paired nicely with your plans." I said each word measured like I was reciting a recipe. "You wanted a new life. I'm just helping you get there." "You had no right," he yelled, his voice rising, but I cut him off sharp and clear. "I had every right. Just as you had every right to choose Sadie. We all make choices, Ethan." His phone buzzed in his pocket, a shrill vibration that sliced through the tension. He glanced at it, then ignored it, but I knew who it was. Sadie, probably wondering why he wasn't at the airport where they'd planned to catch their flight to LA. He tried a different tack, his tone shifting to something smug, almost condescending. "That prenup, it's ancient history," he said, crossing his arms. A flicker of confidence in his eyes. No lawyer will uphold it after all these years. I allowed myself a small smile, the kind that made his bravado falter. Actually, it's still valid. Section 14 states the infidelity clause applies for the duration of the marriage. Your lawyer should have told you that. Oh wait, you didn't hire one, did you? The color drained from his face, his smugness replaced by a dawning panic. The prenup he'd insisted on to protect himself would now strip him of everything: the house, the joint assets, any claim to my bakery. His grand exit at the bakery had just become the most expensive mistake of his life. "You can't do this to me," he said, his voice breaking as he sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "We built this life together." I tilted my head, studying him, my tone cool. "And you chose to burn it down. Just not the way you expected." His phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. He looked at it, groaned, his shoulders slumping further. "Problem?" I asked, a hint of amusement in my voice. "Sadie's at the airport already," he muttered, almost to himself. "Our flight, it's been canceled." I couldn't help but smile, a quiet, knowing smile. "The flight you booked with our joint credit card, the hotel in LA, you reserved with the same card?" He nodded, still dazed, not seeing the trap I'd set. "You might want to check with the credit card company," I said, my voice deceptively casual. "I reported those charges as fraudulent. They've been canceled. I also removed you as an authorized user." His eyes widened, a mix of shock and dread washing over him. "You what?" he stammered, his voice cracking. I stood, gathering my bag and a small overnight case I'd packed for Avery and me. "You have until tomorrow evening to get your things out," I said, my voice firm. "After that, the locks will be changed." As I walked toward the door, Ethan called after me, his voice desperate, pleading, "What about Avery? Have you thought about how this affects her?" I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, anger finally breaking through my calm facade. "Don't you dare use our daughter as an excuse, Ethan. You weren't thinking about her when you were planning your Hollywood life with Sadie." I stepped outside, the Portland rain cool against my skin, and drove across town to Nora's house near Portland State University, where she worked as a freelance graphic designer. The city lights shimmered through the drizzle, the silhouette of Mount Hood faint in the distance. Nora greeted me at the door with a fierce hug, her arms a safe haven after the storm. "I just got off the phone with Avery's teacher," she said, pulling me inside, her voice thick with concern. "She told me Ethan tried to pick her up early, said he was taking her to LA." I froze, my heart racing, but Nora squeezed my hand. "Don't worry. I told the school not to release her. She's safe with her teacher until you get there." I let out a shaky breath, the tension in my shoulders easing just a bit. "Thank you," I said, following her to the living room. A pot of tea sat on the coffee table, steam rising in soft curls, 2 mugs waiting. "I can't believe Ethan pulled that stunt," Nora said, pouring the tea, her eyes dark with anger. "Right in the middle of Avery's last day of school, at her class party no less. He's lost his mind." I took a sip, the chamomile warm and soothing, a sharp contrast to the chill of the evening. "It was meant to catch me off guard," I explained, setting the mug down. "A public exit, so I'd be too shocked to fight back." Nora's face tightened, her lips a thin line. My brother always loved playing the hero. But it's beyond anything I imagined. We sat on her cozy couch, surrounded by her sketch pads and art prints, the windows fogged with the rain outside. Nora had always been a free spirit, her life a canvas of creativity and independence. I'd envied that about her over the years, the ability to live without compromise. What was in that envelope that got him so worked up? She asked, her curiosity cutting through the quiet. I took another sip of tea, then met her gaze. The divorce filing, I said, proof of his financial misconduct, and most importantly, the prenup that'll leave him with nothing. Nora's eyes widened, a sharp laugh escaping her. The prenup, I remember him obsessing over it. Dad had just given him that sales bonus, and he was terrified of losing it. The irony, it's almost too good. My phone rang, the sound jarring in the stillness. It was Henry Caldwell, my attorney. I took a deep breath before answering. "Lily," he said, his voice steady, professional. "I've got an update. The emergency filing was approved. The joint accounts are frozen pending the divorce proceedings. Ethan now has limited access to funds, just enough for basic expenses, not enough for the condo he was eyeing in LA. I let out a breath. I hadn't realized I'd been holding a quiet triumph settling over me. "Thank you, Henry," I said, my voice calm. "Has he been served yet?" Henry's tone carried a hint of amusement. "Not yet, but we tracked him to the airport. He and Sadie are stuck there. Seems their hotel reservation in LA was canceled too." I smiled, the warmth of the tea spreading through me. "Good," I said. "Let him stew for a bit." I hung up, turning to Nora, who raised an eyebrow. "Airport drama?" she asked, a grin tugging at her lips. I nodded, a laugh escaping me. "He's about to learn what happens when you underestimate a baker who knows her numbers." I nodded, a laugh escaping me. "He's about to learn what happens when you underestimate a baker who knows her numbers." I glanced at Nora, her grin mirroring mine. But the moment of levity faded as I thought of Avery waiting at school and aware of the chaos her father had caused. "I need to pick up Avery," I said, setting down my mug, the warmth of the tea lingering in my hands. "She deserves to hear the truth from me." Nora squeezed my arm, her voice soft. "You've got this, Lily, and I've got your back." I smiled, grateful for her support, and headed out into the Portland rain, the city a blur of gray and green as I drove to Avery's school. The preliminary hearing took place on a foggy Thursday morning at the Multnomah County Courthouse, the air heavy with the scent of wet pavement and coffee from a nearby cart. I arrived with Henry, my attorney, while Ethan showed up with a last-minute lawyer from a firm that handled small business disputes, not family law. Another misstep in his crumbling plan. The judge, a woman with a sharp gaze and a no-nonsense air, reviewed the prenup carefully, her pen tapping lightly on the desk. "This document appears to be in order," she said, her voice crisp, authoritative. "Do you contest its validity?" Ethan's lawyer, a nervous young man in a wrinkled suit, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we believe the agreement is outdated due to the length of time that has passed." The judge adjusted her glasses, reading aloud. Section 19 states the duration is for the term of the marriage, plus any legal proceedings resulting from its dissolution. There is no expiration indicated. Ethan leaned forward, whispering urgently to his lawyer, who looked increasingly uneasy, his tie askew. Furthermore, the judge continued, the evidence of systematic fund transfers violates the financial transparency requirements in Section 25. She flipped through the papers, then looked up, her eyes piercing. "I am ruling to maintain the freeze on joint accounts pending full financial discovery." Mr. Monroe's personal account will remain accessible to him. The family home will remain in Mrs. Monroe's possession during proceedings as stipulated in the prenup's infidelity clause. Ethan's face turned a deep shade of red, his hands gripping the table. "This is absurd," he muttered loud enough for me to hear across the courtroom. The judge shot him a stern look, her voice cutting. "Mr. Monroe, I suggest you review the agreement you signed more carefully. This court will reconvene in 30 days for the full hearing after discovery is complete." As we left the courtroom, Ethan caught up to me in the hallway. His steps quick, his voice low, desperate. "Lily, please, we need to talk about this like adults. 14 years together, it has to mean something." I stopped, turning to face him, my expression calm but resolute. It meant everything. "Until you decided it didn't." I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the courthouse hallway, the weight of his choices pressing down on him like the Portland fog outside. Word spread quickly through our social circle, a wildfire of whispers and speculation. Friends called daily, some offering support, others fishing for details to share at their next yoga class. I kept my responses short, my voice steady. "Ethan and I are separating. These things happen." Meanwhile, Ethan's carefully crafted image, successful salesman, devoted father, crumbled like a stale cookie. The financial freeze meant he couldn't keep his promises to Sadie. The LA condo deal fell through, the deposit lost. The new SUV he'd leased was repossessed, the dealership calling to confirm the cancellation. 2 weeks after the hearing, Nora called me, her voice tinged with amusement as she shared the latest. "Guess what? Sadie moved out." I set down my rolling pin on the bakery counter, a small smile tugging at my lips. Already I wasn't surprised, but the speed was impressive. "Apparently, she found out Ethan's company is on the brink of layoffs." Nora said, a laugh in her voice. "The big savings he bragged about, they're gone." She told her friend Grace she didn't sign up to date a man who can't afford his own place. I chuckled, the sound light freeing. "He always was good at spinning stories," I said, shaking my head. While Ethan floundered, I rebuilt the financial security I'd kept in my separate accounts. Ones Ethan never knew about, gave me a freedom he hadn't expected. I leased a small office in the Northwest District, a modern space, with exposed brick walls and a view of the Fremont Bridge, the Willamette River, glinting below. I launched Monroe Accounting Solutions, a consulting firm for women-led startups focusing on financial transparency and growth. My first clients were 3 women opening their own businesses, a florist, a yoga studio owner, a graphic designer, their stories echoing mine in ways that felt both painful and empowering. Word of mouth spread quickly, bringing more clients through my door. I helped women navigate their finances, new ventures, divorces, fresh starts, guiding them with the same precision I'd used to uncover Ethan's lies. The work filled me with purpose, each success a step toward healing, a reminder that I was creating something meaningful from the wreckage of my past. I also expanded Sweet Bloom, opening a second location near Powell's Books, the scent of fresh pastries drawing in tourists and locals alike. Avery, who'd taken the news of our divorce with a quiet strength I hadn't expected, helped me decorate the new shop, her laughter filling the space as we hung fairy lights together. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she said one evening, her words crackling through the phone as I drove home from the bakery. "You're helping people, and you're helping us." I smiled, the Portland skyline glowing in the twilight. "I'm just doing what I wish someone had done for me sooner," I replied. Helping women rise above their storms, being valued for my expertise, Not just my baking felt like stepping into a new recipe, one that was all my own. The final divorce hearing fell on a crisp fall day. The anniversary of the day Ethan and I had first met, a date that once held memories of coffee dates and long walks in Forest Park. Now it marked the closing of a chapter that had spanned nearly a decade and a half. Ethan arrived at the courthouse looking worn, his suit faded, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. I later learned his company had downsized, eliminating his position. After the scandal of his affair with Sadie hit the office rumor mill. Sadie was long gone now, living in Seattle with a new boyfriend closer to her age. Her social media filled with photos of coffee runs and indie concerts. Most of our mutual friends had distanced themselves from Ethan. After the full story emerged, their invitations to barbecues and game nights quietly fading. The judge upheld the prenup in its entirety, her ruling swift and final. Ethan left with his personal belongings, his car, which he still owed money on, and the meager funds in his private account, barely enough for a small apartment in a less desirable part of Portland. I retained our Laurelhurst home, my retirement accounts, and 70% of our joint investments, exactly as the prenup dictated in cases of infidelity. The justice felt like a warm loaf of bread, fresh from the oven, comforting, inevitable. The very document Ethan had insisted on to protect himself had become his undoing. As we left the courthouse, Ethan approached me one last time. His steps hesitant, his voice soft. I made a terrible mistake. He said, his eyes searching mine for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe a trace of the love we'd once shared. Is there any chance we could... I cut him off, my voice gentle but firm, a door closing softly. No, that door is baked shut. He nodded, his shoulders sagging, a quiet acceptance in his gaze. I understand, he said, and for once I believed he did. I hope you find happiness, Lily. You deserve it. It was perhaps the first honest thing he'd said to me in years, a small gesture in the ruins of our past. I gave him a faint nod, then turned and walked away, the sound of my boots echoing on the courthouse steps. 6 months later, Monroe Accounting Solutions was thriving, a lifeline for women across Portland and beyond. I'd moved to a larger office, a bright space with skylights and a small balcony where I could sip my morning coffee, watching the streetcars glide through the Northwest District. I hired 2 associates, both women, both passionate about empowering others, and together we built a community. My clients ranged from single mothers to entrepreneurs, starting over after betrayal, each one a testament to resilience. Sweet Bloom now had 3 locations. The flagship store, a favorite spot for locals and tourists alike. Avery visited often, her school projects and soccer games keeping her busy. But she always made time to stop by, often bringing her friends to try the new lavender scones. You know what's funny, she said one afternoon as we sat in the bakery. The rain, a gentle mist outside. Dad thought he'd win, but he's living with Grandma now. I nodded, taking a sip of my espresso. The city, a canvas of gray and green. Sometimes people can't see the recipe for their own downfall. I replied, my voice soft, reflective. The woman who'd once defined herself as Ethan's wife, as Avery's mother, had found a new identity, one forged in the flour and fire of betrayal. Baker, accountant, advocate. That receipt I'd found in Ethan's pocket wasn't just proof of his betrayal. It was the spark that rewrote my story, a flame that lit the way to a life I'd never dared to dream of. Behind it, I found not just justice, but rebirth. In securing my future, I'd reclaimed something far more delicious, myself. I stood in the bakery, the Portland rain washing away the past, The city stretching out before me, a promise of sweeter days ahead. I stood in the bakery, the Portland rain washing away the past. The city stretching out before me, a promise of sweeter days ahead. A year later, Sweet Bloom had become a local legend, its 3 locations bustling with customers who craved more than just pastries. They craved the story of a woman who turned betrayal into triumph. Monroe Accounting Solutions was now a cornerstone for women entrepreneurs across the Pacific Northwest. Each client a reminder that resilience can rise from the ashes of heartbreak. Ethan, well, he'd moved back in, with his parents, his dreams of LA. Stardust replaced by the reality of a cubicle job at a car dealership. Sadie was long gone, her Instagram now a gallery of Seattle sunsets, with her new boyfriend a barista with a penchant for poetry. As for me, I'd found something sweeter than revenge. I'd found myself. That receipt I'd found in Ethan's pocket, the one that had cracked my world open, wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the spark that rewrote my story, a recipe for a life I'd never dared to bake before. Sometimes the best way to rise isn't to fight the storm, it's to let it fuel your flame. For anyone listening, here's the lesson. Trust your instincts, protect what's yours, and never underestimate the power of a good plan. Life might throw you a bitter ingredient, but with a little grit, you can turn it into something delicious. If you liked this story, drop a 1 in the comments below. If it didn't quite hit the mark, let me know with a 0. Whoa. I'd love to make the next one even better. Or leave your own thoughts. I'm all ears. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It'll give me the push to keep baking up stories just for you.